Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Tom Bates, and I've spent the last 2 decades of my career working with elite athletes from Premier League football, rugby, Formula One, and with Team GB to support high performers operate at their best when it matters the most. Back in 2024, I started to collaborate with Emma Lawson, an expert in organizational transformation. And together, we started to explore how practices from elite sports psychology could be leveraged in different arenas, from sports to business to life, and enable people to step up their performance, create deeper connections, and live a more fulfilling life. We've had some incredible conversations, and now you're invited to join us in these, along with some very special guests from the world of sports and business.
This podcast is for anyone and everyone looking to take their life to the next level. Today, in this first episode, I get to sit down with Tom to leverage his experience from his career.
So Tom, you and I were supposed to catch up about a month ago. You were working at the British Champs, the swimming, and we ended up not seeing each other because there were some standout performances from the athletes that evening, but also there were some very difficult performances that didn't go as planned. And you never really told me in that scenario what was your intervention that you had to do as the team psychologist that night.
Yeah, well, first of all, the British Championships are the qualification meet for the athletes to be selected for the squad to compete at the World Championships in Singapore. So it's a pretty important meet for the athletes in terms of the season. And my role as team performance psychologist is to, by the time we get to the arena, it's really about helping the athletes to remind them that they've done everything to prepare to be at their best, and helping them to practice and integrate the mental and emotional strategies, skills, tools, techniques that they've already rehearsed and put into practice over the last however many months in preparation for this meet. Then my role is to support the coaches with their own journeys, and sometimes that is helping them to manage the athletes, manage upwards. And then I guess you could say the final part of my role is to work with the senior leadership team or the management team, who are responsible for squad selection and the overall culture and performance which is set for Team GB, GB Aquatics. So it's a pretty diverse role. And during the competition, part of the role is to be responsive and to effectively be available for different interventions with all of those three groups.
But we're talking about standout performers, I think, on this podcast. And I think that evening, something hadn't gone very well with one of the athletes or a couple of the athletes. So what was your intervention on that occasion?
One of the things that swimmers in particular have to be able to do is reset and regulate their emotions from heats to semi-finals to finals. Sometimes that's a 24-hour period. At the British Championships, there are morning heats, evening finals predominantly. So each athlete goes on a different journey of attempting to try and stay in the moment and not be negatively affected by a performance that perhaps didn't go their way or was not ideal, or helping them to reset, refocus, re-energize ahead of the final. And then on that particular evening, as an athlete who competed in a final and didn't get the desired result that they wanted, but had another opportunity in a different race to be able to be selected for the squad. So helping that particular athlete to see the opportunity that they still have in front of them, as opposed to the setback. And that's a really psychological process to be in. So that's why I was pretty busy.
Mm-hmm. And you don't just work in swimming though, right? You've been all over this last month. So what have you been up to?
Yeah, it's been a wonderful month. Well, I've realized over probably the last 10 years of my career that the principles of being at our best, the psychological strategies, tools, techniques, principles, are largely, they're cross-contextual.
Mm-hmm.
So a performance at the highest level in rugby union, in the Gallagher Premiership, I currently work with the Bristol Bears, who are right now, as we speak, in the playoff places. How a footballer gets the best of themselves, how a UFC fighter, how a swimmer, how a actor, actress, performing artists. We can train the brain to function in optimal ways, to unleash our highest potential. And that's one of the reasons why I'm actually so fascinated to do this podcast with you, because we've got some fantastic guests lined up. But before we get into that, anyway, I want to just reflect a little bit and think together about how this came into being. Can you remember?
Yeah, so I was working in big business, and it was with an organization that was going through a huge amount of change, very significant change that was actually at the time being quite damaging, I think, to the culture, and had eroded the previous purpose, I think, of the organization. And people within the team had effectively gone into a collective shutdown, I would describe it. And at the time I was working as chief of staff, and I was asked to get involved in creating an intervention. And instinctively at that point, it felt as though I needed to do something different to support people. We needed to do something different to the typical leadership coaching approach that we'd taken in the past. And I knew of you through swimming. I knew about the work that you did, and we got in touch, and you and I really started to explore how we could leverage some of the work that you did, the practice that you did, really focused around helping people leverage mindset in that business context. And, you know, what kind of came about as a series of programs and experiences, and was astounding to me, the impact that we had and the difference that created in people once they had the tools to unlock their mindset, could unlock the way that they felt about what was happening at the time. And I think at the time you and I said, you know, this has been an amazing experience. We had some great conversations. How do we start to share this with more people? You know, wouldn't it be great if we could continue this conversation, but potentially benefit people as well? I think that was it. Is that in line with you? Is that how you remember it?
Reflection. Yeah. You know, it was fascinating to me too, thinking back to the first session that we held together in the boardroom in the corporate sector, because in truth, I didn't know how well the principles from the sporting arena would be received in that boardroom environment with the highest senior leaders within the organization. So to a degree, I stepped in to the unknown, you could say. And that's what I quite like about these conversations with our guests. We're entering into conversations with outstanding human beings, with wonderful stories and valuable experiences for everybody tuning in. And that's what's quite exciting to me, because we often speak about the science of success, don't we?
Yeah.
Strategies, numbers, policies, processes, methodology, systems, structure. But I'm deeply fascinated with the art of success. The human being at the center. I think you described your introduction human-centric, people-centric. So, before we get into that, I've got a question for you, because for the last 20 years, you've been operating at an extremely high level in the corporate arena.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty much have been putting the human being first. So I want to speak to you a little bit about that. How does that work, first of all, when you've got so many people in an organization who are extremely talented?
How does it work? I mean, I wonder if there are similarities with, when the work that you do in, football or with teams. I think, to be people-centric in your approach, you really have to start to understand the individuals that you're impacting, with that transformation. You really have to, first of all, I think, put yourself in the shoes of those individuals. And then for me, it's really about understanding the purpose of the individual and how you can unlock that purpose and help them to essentially associate their purpose with the transformation or the change that you're going through or the strategy that you're implementing. You have to create that connection, I think, with what people are doing and what they feel and what they want and the direction that you are taking them in. So I don't know if that resonates with you.
Well, not only does it resonate, but I think you've probably gone a long way to defining what a healthy high-performance culture is across context. Because what is sport, business, education, music, art, without the human being? It simply wouldn't be. And yet we kind of go about it in an upside down way in many different contexts. In sport, we go from the easiest thing to measure, time, PBs, weight, how quickly I can sprint from one distance to another, strength, flexibility. All of these things have metrics and can be measured and managed and monitored. In a corporate world, I'm guessing that is things like profit and loss.
Yeah. Sales targets.
Yeah. And the fascinating thing for me is that when you start to work the other way by thinking about the human needs of the people in our care, the numbers simultaneously improve. But it's tricky because it's not as measurable. So I think it's fuzzier and it's harder to really, it's not as tangible. Feelings and thoughts. So we're probably, for many reasons, avoid it because it's not as clear.
Yeah.
Actually, it's very simple. As we've discovered and talked about, not only is it simple, but if the cost of not doing that ends up being greater in the long run. So, yeah, it does resonate. It does resonate. Why did you choose? At what point in your career did you get into that? Did you always know that you were that? Or did you evolve and develop and shift at some point in your career and decide?
Yeah. I think, I've been on that journey for quite some time. I think for me, I'm intensely curious and have, at my heart, this kind of desire for looking at what can be better, what can be different. I talk about being something of a catalyst for change, looking to sort of light the sort of flint potentially that kind of creates that sort of fire, that change, that revolution, whatever it is. And I'm just intensely curious about how we could do things different. I'm not very good at settling with the status quo. And so, yeah, I think I fell into transformation really, coming out of that curiosity that I've got for how we could do things better, different. And I love working with diverse teams. I love having the opportunity to work with, the leaders that I have who've truly inspirational.
I love that word, curiosity. It strikes me that being curious is a skill that requires practice.
How do you develop that as a skill?
A lot of us spend our time either accepting or rejecting quickly something at first glance. And with the speed of technological advances and society, click and collect culture, things are getting faster, not slower. So that requires us to make decisions faster. So we've got to get quite good at quickly filtering through what we want in a world that's speeding up, not slowing down. The cost of that is we miss the opportunity of being curious, neither accepting or rejecting, but possessing a mindset to consider. And that's a skill. So how do you develop that? Well, you need good people around you to also place an emphasis on the need for that first and put it into practice together, and recognizing the moments when we're not staying curious, perhaps.
You asked me about how I got into what I do. You haven't said how you got into what you do.
Good question. So I played for Cambridge United Youth Development when I was younger. I was okay as a footballer back then, or was selected because a series of coaches thought that I was okay, you could say. But then didn't make it at the professional level.
Can I just ask, if you'd have had a you then, would that have made a difference?
Most definitely. That's one of the driving forces behind why I chose to do what I do. Because at the time I was in a team with players who had outstanding attitudes and maximized their ability. And then I also saw in the same team players who had outstanding ability but poor attitudes.
What is the balance? What is, in terms of capability, mindset, maybe discipline? I don't know. What is the optimum balance for an athlete?
There's a wonderful phrase that goes like this: the mind is the athlete, the body simply the means. And sometimes coaches will say things like, well, it's at least 50%, 40%, 30%. Some will say, no, I think it's more than that. I think it's 60% mental. And it's fascinating when I hear those conversations, because for me, the mind is at the center. The body simply isn't without the mind. And in the end, when you get to the very highest level, mindset defines performance. The athletes who are best prepared mentally, emotionally, to deal and cope and respond to the constant everyday battle between building confidence and dealing with the setbacks is purely psychological. So at the very highest level, there's a dramatic shift to needing to know how to operate at my best under pressure when it counts, to execute with accuracy, block out distraction, focus under pressure. That's mindset. And that's the reason why I got into doing what I do, because I was fascinated and asked the question, well, I know pretty much as a coach. I qualified as an A-licensed coach with the English FA, and went through the technical, tactical, physical rings of coach development, but was probably still in search of more, something beyond the X's and the O's, beyond the tactics, beyond the pieces moving around on the whiteboard, and ask the question: is it possible to train mindset? Can you improve your ability to focus? What about communicate more clearly? Can you build connections with each other that in the end define performance collectively? And then I started to work in the senior realms, and was really blessed because I had some wonderful head coaches over the years who I would listen to and realize there's something more than just technical, tactical, physical here. They're transformational. They go beyond the ordinary. They could utter a few words and completely alleviate anxiety before performance in a dressing room. They might not say anything at all, but have the ability to shift and shape the emotional temperature of the collective. Now that's interesting to me. How do you do that?
This is something I'm really interested in. I can understand how you can work with an individual, to train mindset. It becomes a whole lot harder when you have a collective team who are a set of different individuals, whether that be in a sporting arena or in a boardroom, with different desires, different demands. How do you collectively train that mindset to create potentially cohesion with that team, a shared goal?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the shared goal is the most important bit, because I remember with many different football clubs I've been a part of, and Brentford and Aston Villa, when I started to work in the senior realms, one of the most important parts of the work became about getting clear about what our shared beliefs, values, expectations, behaviors. Are we aligned when it comes to winning? Can we define winning? What is winning to us? What is success? And how would we know if we were being successful? And in different organizations, different people define that differently. And that's the purpose, because people are different and we need to understand them to see the world through their eyes, step into their shoes, as you said earlier. So that's exciting to me, because then you get into the realms of, well, if these are our values and beliefs and expectations, then surely that shapes our behaviors. And a shared mental model is much easier to create, because we've got some type of alignment. And that also means we can challenge each other when we don't align.
Of all your career, what is the standout moment for you where you've really seen all of that work that you've done, all the practice that you've done really come to fruition?
I mean, so at the apex of that winning culture that we're speaking about is a shared mental model with cultural architects, culture carriers, key leaders who are able to continue to shape the culture, defend the culture, uphold the culture by leading by example. So it's a collective group of people that own the culture. Culture is not one person. My role was head of performance psychology and culture at Aston Villa. But obviously, one person is absolutely not responsible for all of that. But I think it was a great sign that Aston Villa back then was signposting the importance of the role. There have been so many standout moments in my career, across so many different sports.
Come on, you got to pick one.
I know. Wow, it's so hard.
This is performance under pressure.
I mean, being in Japan, Tokyo during COVID, the 2020+1 games, and working very closely with triple Olympic champion and 14-time world record holder Adam Peaty, knowing that he placed a significant value on the psychological work that we did to prepare and defend back-to-back gold in that race, which ended up being then British swimming's first gold medal at the Tokyo Games, which then set off an incredible momentum for the whole team. Duncan Scott went on to become the most decorated British athlete at one Games of all time in that same, in Tokyo. And then British swimming became the most successful they have ever been in the history of the sport. That was all during COVID, which was a pretty alien and different time for all of us. So that is absolutely one of the standout moments. But I think the thing that I'm possibly, the experience that I look back on now with happiness and peace is the Sheffield Wednesday playoff semi-final success. For anybody listening, Sheffield Wednesday were 4-0 down in a semi-final first leg to Peterborough. And for context, no team in the history of the Football League in England has ever overturned more than a 2-0 deficit from the first semi-final leg to the second semi-final leg and been successful at Wembley in the final. So we were 4-0 down.
Oh, wow.
And for any football fans out there listening, I'm sure that they'll know the rest of the story, but we became the first team in history to overcome more than a 2-0 deficit. We equalized in normal time
Yeah.
to go 4-4, 5-4 down in extra time, 5-5 equalizer, and then we were victorious on penalty kicks to reach Wembley. And
So in that situation, what was the work that the team had done in order to achieve that sort of standout performance, coming back, as you say, from that deficit of goals?
yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, the outside story in the media was Sheffield Wednesday are out. It's game over. They've lost. And the story was so big that on every media channel, Sky Sports, newspapers, social media, the story was the same. So we had to very quickly create our own story,
Okay.
take control of the narrative, and the manager was instrumental. The very next day in the training ground, he showed some historic moments of wonderful comebacks. Liverpool versus AC Milan in Istanbul, the final. Liverpool versus Barcelona. A couple of others were thrown in there, Barcelona, Paris Saint-Germain. And the message was quite clear. Historically, this has been done at the highest level. So what is it going to take now for us to be able to turn this around? Well, it starts with the belief that we can, and then plan for every eventuality. So we built the belief that it's possible. We killed the enemy of doubt in lots of different ways. And there were many things we did. We trained for penalty kicks the very next day. The manager I was very privileged because the manager has been probably the only manager across all of my career to bring me in so close to him, but also to teach and coach and work with the players on such a personal level. So I ended up taking the lead on our penalty project, and we're 4-0 down, by the way, at this point. So the players are looking at me going, what on earth are we
Work your
practicing
magic.
penalty? Why are we practicing penalty? We're 4-0 down. But the captain was instrumental, Barry Bannon, who I hope agrees to come on the podcast in the future. I'm sure he will. Who is coming on the podcast in the future. The captain was very important. So in the end, the players were so open-minded and willing to prepare properly, to give it everything. And they did. They delivered. It was an incredible moment in my career.
So, Tom, you work across a variety of different domains, different contexts. How do you ensure that you get the best out of others in each of those different scenarios?
Really good question, because my understanding of that has probably evolved over the last 10 years. If I take the last few months, for example, within elite sport, I've worked within mixed martial arts, UFC, professional fighters, rugby union here in the Gallagher Premiership, professional football teams, an actor, a Formula 3, Formula 1 driver, and so on and so forth. So let's say a sport that I know the least about is probably the UFC. I've had some background in martial arts myself personally, but I certainly wouldn't claim to be an expert in the technical, tactical, physical demands of that sport. What's really interesting, though, is that the principles, exercises, tools, techniques, and strategies that we can use to train the brain are almost identical. So if I just go into that a little bit, and this is true of any elite athlete and can be translated into the corporate world. Let's say I want to be able to focus under pressure and execute my role with accuracy when it matters. 4 simple things to be able to enter into the optimal emotional state, because as human beings, our emotional states change and shift. And if we're consciously aware of how to change our state, performance follows.
Okay.
So 4 simple techniques that I've found have a significant impact on high performers across contexts. Number 1 is the process of visualization. To see myself and imagine myself operating at my very best, whatever the context is. So anybody listening to this can do this. It matters not which arena you perform in, business, sport, education, wherever. So to the brain, when you visualize very, very well, 2/3, for an athlete anyway, is the same when you visualize compared to when you physically perform for real. That's just one simple technique to see myself performing optimally. 2 is the conscious act of breathing. And there are so many different types of breathing that you can change state in a heartbeat. So if anybody listening to this just takes a breath right now, in through their nose, all the way in, and slowly releases the exhalation through their mouth with control. Immediately, you will notice an emotional state shift to being much more present in the moment, here and now. And that's just one technique. So visualization, breathing, self-talk, inner dialogue is a hugely important tool for athletes and people to be able to structure thinking, affirmations. So an athlete I was working with just this morning, who's going to compete at the weekend, developed an affirmation based off of his ideal emotional state, which went like this: I am focused, I am free, I am relaxed. That's a form of external self-talk. So we've gone through visualization, breathing techniques, self-talk, and body language is so important that whoever you are, wherever you are, if you just adopt, and there's been so many research papers written about this, if you just adopt a certain physiology, standing with power, strength, and positivity, you can significantly change not just your neurology or your emotional state, but at a hormonal level, alter the chemicals in your bloodstream. You can increase oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, adrenaline, testosterone, and simultaneously decrease stress hormones like cortisol just by adopting a physiology of strength, power, and positivity. So body language is an extremely important tool. And those are just 4. I mean, there are many others, but you can see how these tools can be translated across contexts, perhaps adapted to the demands of the person. I mean, do you remember doing the session before in the boardroom?
Yeah.
And I mean, what do you remember about that? Did you remember looking around the room and seeing people slightly uncomfortable? And
Definitely. I remember people getting very uncomfortable very quickly, but then also becoming comfortable quite quickly with that discomfort. And I remember you got, people in the boardroom essentially doing a state-changing exercise. I remember the Superman pose very, very well. What was really noticeable, and I think I said this to you at the time, was post the session, how quickly, people seemed to adopt those practices. You saw people kind of walking into the meeting room, sort of sitting up, sort of leaning up. And I think that's what I really loved about what you did, and probably why we ended up working together on a number of occasions. It's some very simple tactics that were very easy to adopt and had a huge impact, and it was very accessible. And that was what was the power of it, really.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good point that you make, making the complex simple.
Yes.
Because people who are operating in high performance environments need something to pick up and apply quickly.
Yeah.
Because the pace of the demands of the position in any high performance role is so fast.
Yeah.
But that's also part of a skill, isn't it? To be able to eject from. That's really interesting that you remember that.
Yeah. I have just one question for you. What are the 2 characteristics that you think you see in all high performers if you just had to pick 2?
Wow. Yeah. Great question. there are so many, aren't there? But if I had to boil them down and prioritize and think about across at the very highest level, let's say the 0.01% high achievers.
Okay.
So I think the discipline to stay committed, even if and especially when you don't feel like doing something.
Mm-hmm.
Motivation comes and goes. Some days I feel great, some days I'm not so motivated.
Yeah.
So if we know that about motivation, commitment eats motivation for breakfast. Because commitment says, regardless of how I feel, when the alarm clock goes off at 5 a.m. and my legs are tired, don't want to get up, it's dark outside, it's raining, I've got 3 sessions ahead of the day, gym session, track session, ring session, whatever it is. The internal voice says, I made a contract with myself that I was going to do this regardless of how I feel. And I think in the end, those championship winning traits produce a resilient, enduring mindset.
Okay.
Because when I think about it, success is really, it depends less on how we respond when things are going our way.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, there's that wonderful graph of that picture of success, which starts off down here and shoom, straight to the top. How most people think the journey to success looks like. And then on the other side is the reality of the journey of success and the squiggly lines all over the show and down and up and down again and up. So it's a lot more, I think in the end, success, quote unquote, depends much more on how we respond actively, positively, consciously to the very things that make us want to give up.
But what about purpose? Because how do you have that discipline without a clear purpose?
It's a very, I think they go hand in hand.
Okay.
Otherwise, if I don't have a strong enough reason why,
Yeah.
you know, Nietzsche teaches us, doesn't he, that those who have a strong enough why will endure anyhow. So absolutely, purpose is in the center. And I like the way that you framed that, because it's difficult to stay disciplined and committed without knowing why I am.
Yeah.
So purpose is absolutely at the center. But in terms of traits,
Okay. Yeah.
discipline and commitment would be the psychological traits. I think that in the end is the difference between good and great and great and greatest.